Clara trudged along the dusty streets of the frontier town, her small child clinging to her skirts, their faces smudged with the grime of long days without proper shelter or food, the relentless sun beating down on their weary bodies and the harsh wind carrying the dust of a land that seemed determined to reject them. She had arrived in this town with nothing but a tattered satchel and the faint hope that somewhere some kind stranger might offer a moment's kindness. Yet each closed door and wary glance reminded her of the unforgiving reality she now faced, the gnawing emptiness in her stomach, a constant companion to the fear that she might not be able to protect her child, little Samuel, from the dangers lurking in alleys and the wild outskirts beyond the town's borders. The memory of her husband, who had vanished weeks ago under mysterious circumstances, haunted her every step, a mixture of grief and disbelief weighing down her heart, leaving her unsure whether she should have followed him, sought help, or simply run, as she now did, from the life she had once imagined would be full of love and security. She watched other mothers pass by with their children, sturdy baskets in hand, and a sense of ease in their gait, and felt a pang of envy, the contrast between their lives and her own, sharp as a whip, yet even in her despair, Clara found herself marveling at the resilience of her little boy, whose wide trusting eyes and tiny determined hands held on to her without complaint, a silent promise that he would endure as long as she did. And in that thought she found a flicker of courage, a fragile spark that urged her forward. The town's streets, lined with weathered wooden buildings and storefronts that sold both promise and disappointment, seemed almost like a labyrinth, each corner hiding the potential for kindness or cruelty. And Clara learned to read the subtle signs of human nature, the wary glance of a shopkeeper, the hurried step of a stranger, the fleeting smile of a child who recognized a fellow soul in distress, and she began to navigate this precarious world with quiet caution, all the while seeking shelter for the night, hoping for scraps of food, and praying that someone, anyone, might see beyond her tattered clothing and desperate eyes to the woman beneath. A mother who would do anything to survive. And in that lonely, uncertain walk, Clara and Samuel pressed onward, their bond unbroken, their hearts clinging to the faintest hope that the horizon might hold a chance for safety, warmth, and the beginning of a life free from the fear and hunger that had come to define their days. As Clara wandered near the outskirts of town, where the wooden buildings gave way to open fields dotted with dry grass and the occasional fence marking someone's claim, she noticed a figure moving deliberately across the ranch lands, a tall, broad-shouldered man on horseback, his hat pulled low over his eyes, and the sunlight glinting off the polished leather of his saddle. He was Daniel, a rancher known in town for his skill with cattle and his fierce independence, a man who rarely trusted strangers and whose life was measured by the rhythm of chores and the seasons rather than the chatter of society. Yet on this day, fate guided his gaze toward Clara, whose small figure and child struggling at her side stood out starkly against the pale horizon, evoking a flicker of concern that he could not ignore. Daniel slowed his horse, observing her with a mixture of curiosity and caution, noting the weariness in her movements, the thinness of her coat, the desperation that seemed to cling to her like a shadow. And he felt an unexpected tug in his chest, a protective instinct he rarely admitted even to himself, rising unbidden. Clara, sensing the gaze, stiffened and instinctively pulled Samuel closer, fear mingling with the relief that perhaps someone had finally noticed her plight, though she kept her voice steady as she called out to the man, hoping for kindness but wary of judgment, aware that in this land, help often came at a price, or worse, with intentions that might do more harm than good. Daniel, dismounting with the ease of a man accustomed to horses and open spaces, approached slowly, offering a curt nod and a voice, roughened by wind and labor, asking where she and the child were headed, what they needed, and more importantly, why they had been left to wander so alone. And in that moment, a fragile connection was forged between the very self-reliant rancher and the woman whose eyes reflected both exhaustion and quiet determination. A silent understanding passing between them that each recognized the other's resilience, and though neither spoke of it aloud, the possibility of something unexpected in alliance, a protection, a shift in destiny began to form, hovering in the air between the dust, the wind, and the wide open sky of the frontier, marking the first step toward a story neither could have anticipated but both were about to live. The following morning, after Clara and Samuel had spent a cold, restless night in a makeshift shelter near the edge of Daniel's ranch, the rugged rancher approached her once again, his expression unreadable, a mix of pragmatism and curiosity that made Clara wary, though she could not hide the relief that he had returned. Daniel's voice, low and steady, carried an unusual gravity as he made a proposition that stopped Clara mid-step. He needed a wife to help manage the ranch, a partner to shoulder the relentless work, care for the animals, and bring a sense of order to a life measured by seasons and sweat rather than comfort. And though the words were blunt and almost transactional, they held the promise of security she had not dared to hope for. A chance to give Samuel a roof over his head and a warm meal without fear of judgment or harm from strangers. Clara froze, her mind spinning between disbelief, suspicion, and the tiny spark of hope that this sudden audacious offer might be the lifeline she so desperately needed. Yet the audacity of it made her recoil. How could she trust a man whose very first proposal was so bold, so startling, so utterly unexpected? And in the quiet that followed, the wind rustling through the sparse grass, she weighed the impossible odds, calculating the risk of stepping into the unknown against the certainty of continued hardship if she refused. Daniel, sensing her hesitation, did not press with charm or persuasion. His eyes steady and unflinching, revealing a man used to commanding his land yet not accustomed to negotiating with another human heart. And in that silent standoff, Clara recognized the raw truth of frontier life. Survival often demanded decisions that frightened the soul, yet offered the only path to safety, and with a deep, steadying breath, she felt a flicker of resolve, a quiet determination that perhaps, just perhaps, this unexpected proposal was less a gamble than a door opening to a future she had scarcely dared to imagine, a chance to transform her despair into hope and to see in Daniel not just a rugged rancher with a desperate request, but a man whose life like hers could be reshaped by courage, trust, and the fragile beginnings of something entirely new. After a night filled with restless thoughts and the persistent hum of fear and hope, Clara made the difficult decision to accept Daniel's unexpected proposal, her heart a mixture of anxiety and cautious relief as she prepared to step into a life she had never imagined. She gathered the few belongings she owned, wrapped Samuel in the thin blanket that had been their only comfort against the chill of the past nights, and followed Daniel across the rolling fields toward his ranch, each step heavy with uncertainty yet buoyed by the faintest spark of possibility, knowing that this move could either secure their survival or plunge them into unknown hardships. For the life of a rancher's wife was as demanding as it was unfamiliar, and she had no illusions about the long hours, back-breaking work, and the constant vigilance required to keep both child and home safe in a land where nature and man could be equally unforgiving. Daniel guided her with a quiet patience, his presence both reassuring and intimidating, a man accustomed to independence yet now intertwined with her. Fate and Clara observed the ranch as they approached the sturdy wooden buildings, the corrals, the open pastures stretching to the horizon, realizing that this was both a sanctuary and a responsibility, a place where she could find stability but only if she learned to navigate its challenges and the temperaments of those who called it home. Samuel, sensing the change in his mother's demeanor, clung to her hand with trusting eyes, and Clara felt a surge of protective determination, understanding that her acceptance of Daniel's offer was not just about survival, but about forging a home where her child could grow without fear. And slowly, as the ranch came into full view against the blazing sunset, she allowed herself to imagine a life beyond mere endurance, a life that could hold warmth, companionship, and perhaps even a fragile kind of love, though she knew it would be earned through patience, courage, and the willingness to step into a world that demanded everything of her, while offering the promise of everything she had been longing for. And so, with a mix of trepidation and quiet hope, Clara and Samuel crossed the threshold of the ranch, the start of a new chapter unfolding beneath the vast skies of the frontier, where every dawn would test their resilience, and every act of trust and effort could shape the bond forming between a weary woman and the rugged man who had, in one startling proposition, changed the course of their lives forever. Life on the ranch was harder than Clara had ever imagined, each day a relentless cycle of chores that tested her strength, patience, and resolve. From feeding the livestock before sunrise, to hauling water across uneven terrain, mending fences battered by wind and storm, and learning to navigate the unpredictable temperament of horses and cattle alike. Yet despite the physical exhaustion, there was a rhythm to the work that slowly began to soothe the anxious edge she had carried through the streets of town. And Daniel, while still reserved and exacting, offered guidance with a quiet authority that forced her to adapt quickly, his presence a steady anchor amidst the endless demands of frontier life. Clara discovered that survival here required more than endurance. It required ingenuity, observation, and a willingness to face discomfort without complaint. Lessons she absorbed with Samuel close at her side, his laughter occasionally piercing the routine toil like sunlight through the clouds, reminding her that even in hardship, life could still hold small, precious moments of joy. Daniel, for his part, began to notice her resilience, the careful attention she gave to every task, the way she learned quickly and persisted even when failure seemed inevitable. And though he rarely spoke of emotion, subtle gestures, a steadying hand when she struggled, sharing a quiet meal at dusk, a glance that lingered longer than necessary, hinted at a growing respect, and perhaps a dawning affection tempered by the cautious pragmatism that had defined his life for so long. Clara too found herself seeing beyond Daniel's gruff exterior, recognizing a man shaped by hardship, bound to the land by duty and pride. And slowly, in the sweat and dust of long days, a fragile trust began to form between them, one built on shared effort, unspoken understanding, and the quiet acknowledgement that they were, each in their own way, offering what the other needed most: stability, safety, and the first whispers of companionship in a world that had offered them so little. And as the sun dipped behind the hills each evening, painting the ranch in hues of gold and amber, Clara allowed herself brief moments of hope, imagining a future where her child could grow strong, where she might find her place, not just as a survivor, but as a partner, learning slowly that life on the ranch, though unforgiving, was teaching her lessons in strength and endurance, and the subtle power of trust, marking the beginning of a bond that neither time nor toil could easily sever. Over time, the rhythm of ranch life began to create space for something deeper between Clara and Daniel, a fragile trust that grew in the quiet moments between labor and responsibility, when the sun hung low and the wind whispered across the open fields, carrying with it a sense of possibility neither had anticipated. Small gestures, a shared laugh over a stubborn horse, Daniel handing Clara tools without a word but with evident respect, Clara quietly tending to Samuel while noticing Daniel's subtle struggles with the more challenging tasks of the ranch, began to weave an unspoken bond, a recognition that they were no longer merely coexisting out of necessity, but gradually learning to rely on one another in ways that mattered far beyond survival. Late nights by the fire, the flickering flames casting shadows on their faces, offered opportunities for conversation, sometimes awkward, sometimes revealing, where Daniel glimpsed the fierce intelligence and gentle strength in Clara's eyes, and Clara saw the protective, disciplined heart beneath his rugged exterior. A man who had lived alone by choice, yet was slowly opening himself to the vulnerability required to care for another, and for her child. Trust was not instantaneous, both carried the scars of lives shaped by loss, hardship, and betrayal, but it began to take root in quiet confidence, in moments where words were unnecessary and understanding was enough. And with each day, Clara felt a growing sense of security and belonging, while Daniel, though he would never admit it aloud, started to feel a warmth he had long denied himself, a recognition that life could be richer with shared burdens and shared joys. Samuel, sensing the subtle shift between his mother and Daniel, began to relax into the rhythms of ranch life, his laughter and curiosity bridging gaps, softening tension, and reminding them both that family could be formed not just by blood but by trust, effort, and the willingness to care. And so, amid the endless chores, the unpredictability of the land, and the harshness of frontier living, Clara and Daniel began to cultivate not only the ranch and its livestock but a growing emotional connection, a partnership built on mutual respect, small acts of kindness, and the tentative hope that love, however slow to bloom, could thrive even in the toughest of landscapes, promising a life that neither of them had dared to imagine when first they met at the edge of the town. Just as Clara and Daniel were settling into a fragile sense of security, the past and the dangers of frontier life arrived, unbidden, to test the bond they had begun to forge, when a figure from Clara's life, a man claiming to be her missing husband or perhaps a rival with designs on the ranch, appeared at the edge of their property, bringing with him tension, uncertainty, and a threat that could unravel the tentative stability they had built. Fear gripped Clara as old memories resurfaced, the helplessness of her time on the streets and the vulnerability of her child flooding her thoughts, while Daniel, whose protective instincts had grown stronger with every shared day, reacted with a mix of quiet fury and strategic determination, knowing that the safety of Clara and Samuel rested squarely on his shoulders, and that any hesitation could be disastrous. Together, they were forced into a delicate dance of negotiation, confrontation, and trust, relying on the unspoken understanding that had developed between them, testing the strength of the bond that had grown in sweat, shared labor, and the slow, careful unfolding of affection. Clara, who had once doubted the rancher's intentions and her own ability to survive, found courage she did not know she possessed, stepping forward to protect her child and asserting herself in ways that surprised even Daniel, proving that survival was not the task of one person alone, and that strength could be drawn from the unity they now shared. The threat, whether in the form of an unscrupulous suitor, a land dispute, or a violent claim to what Daniel had built, forced them into action, blending strategy, determination, and mutual reliance as they worked side by side, their trust in each other deepening with every challenge faced, every risk taken, and every silent acknowledgement that neither would abandon the other in the face of danger. By the time the confrontation was resolved, through courage, negotiation, or a decisive act that secured their safety, Clara and Daniel had discovered not only their resilience, but also the profound truth that life on the frontier demanded both independence and interdependence, and that love born slowly amid dust, sweat, and uncertainty could be tempered and strengthened by adversity, leaving them with a renewed understanding of each other and the unspoken promise that whatever trials lay ahead, they would face them together, as partners in life, work, and heart. With the threat behind them and the dust of conflict settling over the ranch, Clara and Daniel finally allowed themselves to breathe, their hearts lighter, yet profoundly changed, as they began to truly envision a future together, rather than simply surviving day by day. The long hours of labor, the shared struggles, and the moments of quiet understanding had forged a bond stronger than either could have anticipated, one built on trust, respect, and a deep unspoken affection that had grown through the trials of frontier life, and now they could see that this rugged land, once intimidating and unyielding, could also be a place of warmth, family, and hope. Clara, watching Samuel play freely in the wide fields, felt a sense of security she had never known, a knowledge that her child's laughter and well-being were protected not just by her own determination but by the steady presence of a man who had gone from stranger to guardian to partner, someone whose life and hers were now irrevocably intertwined, and whose care extended beyond survival into the quiet joys of companionship and shared purpose. Daniel, observing Clara's resilience, compassion, and strength, realized that the partnership he had once viewed pragmatically had blossomed into something far more profound, a connection of hearts and minds, where mutual respect had evolved into love, gentle yet steadfast, capable of withstanding the hardships that the Wild West inevitably demanded. As the sun dipped low behind the hills, casting golden light over the ranch, they walked together toward the homestead, hands brushing, smiles exchanged, the quiet laughter of Samuel between them. And in that simple, unguarded moment, both understood that they had created not just a household, but a home, a sanctuary of hope, trust, and belonging. The past hardships, the fears, and the uncertainties had shaped them, but not defined them, and the life they now shared promised stability, love, and the freedom to grow as a family, proving that even in the harshest of landscapes the human heart could find resilience, courage, and ultimately, joy, marking the beginning of a new chapter in which Clara, Daniel, and Samuel could face the future together, stronger, united, and unafraid.